Hello everyone and welcome to the video from Math 8 Lesson 10. This is going to be a shorter video because this is still technically Chapter 6 Section 4, but it's an extension of that chapter dealing with bank accounts and money and such. And this will be found on page 240. And how this is an extension is, once again, it deals with accounts, okay, so like a savings account. But in this case, we're going to be specifically talking about checking accounts. Okay, so when you go to the bank, there's more than two different types of accounts you get, but the two big ones that you can always get are savings accounts, which is what we talked about when we talked about simple interest. And then you can also have a checking account, which is basically an account that you can use to pay for things, meaning like you can set up to where you can write checks or use debit cards, as you'll see here just a few seconds. But this section has to do with account balance, and how we're going to take care of an account balance is using a checkbook registry. Okay, what is a checkbook registry? Well, very first line here tells us what that is. It says you can keep up with how much you have in a checking account by using a checkbook registry. So it's basically going to be like a table that you can use to keep track of your purchases and keep track of how much money you have in your account. Okay. So when you have a checkbook registry, you need to pay attention to two different things. Okay. Which when we look at the first registry here, I'll go over what each column is in the registry. But the big thing that you have to know in order to answer questions on this and be able to know how to balance your checkbook or know your account balance is the difference between credit and debit. Okay, so if you look right here, when we're using a checkbook registry, if you have a credit, this is an amount you add to your bank account. Okay, so a credit is something like how much you put into an account. So if you get paid and you put your paycheck into your account, you add that to your bank account. Okay. If you get some money for your birthday and you decide to put it in your checking account, okay, well, that's how much you're going to add to your bank account. So all these things I've just talked about are credits, okay? So when you're talking about a bank account, credits are an amount you add to your banking account. On the flip side of that, we have debit or debits, okay? And what a debit is an amount you subtract from your bank account. So if you use your debit card, okay, as you'll see here in just a few seconds with the last line here, if you use your debit card, what do you do when you use your debit card? Well, you pay for something at a store, or you pay for something, and what do you have to do when you pay for something is you take that money from your bank account. So that's the money you subtract from your bank account. That's why when you have a debit card, when you use a debit card, that's what you do from your checking account is you debit or you subtract from your account. Okay. So once again, difference between credit and debit. Credit you add to your account, debit you subtract. So when you deposit money into your account, you make a credit. Okay, so once again, that's like if you have a paycheck from your work. Okay, when you get a paycheck from your work, that money gets deposited into your account. Okay, when somebody pays you in terms of cash or a check, and you put that money into your bank account, those would be considered credits because that's when you deposit money into your account. When you pay for something with a check or debit card, okay, so one thing here, it's getting used less and less often as we go along. Most people know and use a debit card anymore. But in this case, it happens with checks. So when you see somebody writing a check, that's what happens when they write a check is you take the money that the check is written for out of your account. So it's subtracted from your checking account. Okay. Or when you withdraw money. So if you go to an ATM, okay, or an automatic teller machine, I've heard of people going to ATMs and withdrawing money. So they get money out of an ATM. Well, where does that money come from? Well, it comes from their checking account. So it counts as a debit because once again, that's taking money away from their account. Okay. That's called making a debit. Okay. So once again, the big thing here, knowing the difference between credit and debit and what causes those. Okay. So once again, depositing money gives you a credit. taking money from your account. So whether that's paying with a check, debit card, or withdrawing money, that is a debit. Okay. And really, that's all you need to know how to balance a checkbook, because when we go to the next slide here, let's go ahead and look at example 1. So example 1, we're going to be reconciling an account. So basically what we mean by that is we're going to be just making sure that that your bank account matches with what your bank statement says. Okay. So what that means is when we answer this question, we're reconciling the account. We're making sure that the amount that the bank says we have is the actual amount we have in our account. Okay. So how we do that is just like right here in example 1. So your monthly bank statement shows that the balance of your account is $791.01. Okay. So that's what the bank is telling you have in your account. Okay. But as you'll see in the next example, sometimes what the bank tells you have might be a little bit different than what you actually have in your account. Okay. And we'll see why that is in the next example. But what we're asked to do here is to enter the 2 additional transactions shown in your checkbook registry below. Okay. So once again, these 2 transactions, okay, we had to pay an ATM fee and then we got paid interest. We need to put those into our registry here and check and see, does your balance agree with the bank statement? Okay. So first things first, let's look at the registry. Okay. Registry, once again, is a table where normally you have a place for a date. So when the transaction takes place, so whenever you buy something, whenever you take money out of your account, put money into your account, usually you write down the date. Check number, once again, this is becoming rarer and rarer, but if you write a check, usually you want to write the number for the check so you can keep track of, okay, where's all my checks going? Did all my checks clear? Did my stuff get paid for by check, or did I use my debit card? How did I pay for it? Well, in this case, check number tells us which check you used to pay for which transaction over here. So once again, this is just telling you check number 998 went to pay for transaction the cell phone bill. Okay. Check number 999 went to pay car payment. And then if they paid another thing by check here, once again, or if you paid another thing by check, you would put maybe check number 1000 was used to pay for gas or something. Okay. But once again, this check number is just telling you which check was used to pay for what transaction. And speaking of transaction, that's the next column, transaction. Usually you put here just a little, bit of information about what the payment or what was going on with the transaction. So what that means is this transaction, you paid a cell phone bill. Okay. And once again, going back to check number, you use check number 998, and that was on 5/17/2018 or 2018. Okay. Or 2018. So we go down to the next one, car payment. Okay. So once again, just some information here just to tell you kind of what the payment or what was going on with that transaction. So in this case, you had to pay a cell phone bill. In this case, you had to pay a car payment. But if you look at the next one, it says you deposited a paycheck. Okay. So once again, you're where you're working, maybe they deposited the check for you, or you got a check and you deposited it yourself. But whatever happened there, you deposited the paycheck, and then we go on to the next thing. Well, was that a credit or a debit? Well, in the case of the deposit paycheck, it is a credit. Okay. Once again, it's a deposit paycheck, and the information here, that means you're going to put this money into your account. That means it's going to be a credit. So you increase your account by $501.50. But before that, on 5/17, you paid a cell phone bill and you paid a car payment, and those go in the debit column here. Okay. So your cell phone bill was $58. Okay. So that means $58 came out of your account. So that is a debit. Okay. You paid a car payment of $82.66. That means $82.66 came out of your account. Okay. So that's what these 2 columns tell you. If something's in the credit side and it's a credit, that means you're going to add this. If something's in the debit side, that means you're going to subtract it from your balance. Now, The last part here is the balance, and this is the thing that you have to calculate, okay? So the balance, you always calculate it as you go. So what ends up happening here is, okay, they tell you after you paid your cell phone bill, so after you take away the $58, your balance was $372.85. Okay? Well, what do we have after that? Well, that's where we're going to have to fill in, okay? So we take the balance from here, and then we go to the next line. Well, then we take $82.66 from the car payment. So that would leave us with $290.19. And all we have to do here is take our balance and subtract, since it's a debit, $82.66. So that leaves us with $290.19. Okay? Then we go to the next line, deposit paycheck. Well, you deposited, that means you're going to add $501.50 to your current balance, okay? And the current balance we just calculated was $290.19. So we take the $501.50 and add it to the $290.19, which gives us $791.69. But in order to finish the question, we have to put in our own two transactions over here, okay? Now, one thing I do want to point out is, notice here there's no dollar signs, okay? Usually when we do a bank or a checkbook registry, we leave off the dollar signs because, for one, it's kind of understood when we're talking about credits, debits, and balance, we're talking about money, okay? And two, it kind of gives us a little more space. So if we had to put dollar signs for every single one of these here, it would take up a lot of space that we could just use to put the numbers down, okay? So when you see a transaction log like this, or a credit or a checkbook registry, okay, usually you won't see dollar signs in here. But when we calculate the final answer, you got to understand everything here is a dollar amount. Everything in the debit and credit side are the dollar amounts. So I'll make note of that when we finally answer the question. But we have to go through and add our two other transactions. So on 5/22, so we have to write in here 5/22/18, we had to pay an ATM fee. So that means whenever you go to an ATM, if it's not an ATM that's owned by your bank, sometimes you have to pay an ATM fee, which is just like a small fee, like $2.50, $3, that you have to pay in order to use that other machine, okay? And sometimes, that's why it's always good if you go to the ATM to go to the ATM at your own bank, okay? But in this case, you apparently went to an ATM that wasn't owned by your bank, so you had to pay an ATM fee of $2.50. So we didn't pay by check, but in this case, we have to put this was an ATM fee. And in this case, we got to think, well, if it's a fee, that means we have to pay the fee, okay? So what is that going to be doing to our account? Well, that means we're going to be taking away $2.50 from our account. So we put the $2.50 in the debit side of the account, okay? So once again, we do that. Well, what do we got to do with that? ATM fee, we took away $2.50. That means we took away $2.50 from the $791.69, okay? So that's the next thing we got to do. We got to take $791.69 and subtract $2.50. So that gives us $789.19. Okay? So once again, all that you're doing here is either adding or subtracting. So from here to here, we had to subtract because it was a debit. From here to here, we added because it was a credit. And then from here to here, we subtracted because it was a debit. Now, the next transaction happened on 5/24/18. 5/24/18. In this case, they tell you it was an interest, okay? Well, in this case, what kind of interest was it? Well, they tell you that it's interest that you paid, that you were paid. So it's interest that you gained, okay? So in this case, interest. And what I would probably do is write in here gained, because as we saw in the last section, interest can be more you have to pay or how much you get paid for using money, okay? So in this case, it's money that you're getting paid to have money in your bank account. So in this case, that's going to be a credit. So $1.82 is a credit. Well, once again, it goes in the credit side of things because that's money that's going to be added to your account, okay? And what do? Well, we take that $1.82 and we add it to the balance from the previous line. So $789.19. We add to it $1.82. So in this case, we have $791.01. And once again, that's all the transactions that we have for this at this point. So let's answer the question. Okay, so we entered the two additional transactions. We have the balance here. Okay, that's the final balance that we calculate. Does that balance agree with the bank statement? Okay, and the answer here is yes. Okay, because the bank statement said we had $791.01. We calculated using our own transaction log that we have $791.01 in the bank. So your calculation agrees with the bank statement. Okay, which is always a good thing. You always want your calculations to match up with your bank's, what they calculate, okay? So that way you can accurately know how much money you have in the bank account, okay? But once again, a lot of different things here. If you never used a bank account before, it can be kind of tricky in some of these cases, but literally all you have to do is either add or subtract depending on whether your transaction is a credit or a debit. Okay, once again, you paid a cell phone bill, it's a debit. That means the balance that it was before, you subtracted $58 to get $372.85. Well, what did we have to do to get from $372.85 to $290.19? Well, we had to subtract $82.66 because that was the debit that you made when you paid your car payment. Okay? And once again, we do all the transactions. We get the final balance here is $791.01, which matches with what our bank said we had. Okay? Now, let's go on to, and honestly, that's pretty much it for this section in terms of you just need to know how to add or subtract credits and debits. Okay? So it's just good to understand and know, okay, well, what are you adding? What are you subtracting? Okay, what's the transaction actually doing? Now, in a question like this, example 2, they're going to give you all the transactions. They're going to give you if they're credit or debit, and it's going to be up to you to go in here and just calculate the balance. Okay, so interpreting a checkbook registry, you balance your checkbook at the end of the month. Okay, and that's usually when people balance their checkbook at the end of the month just to see, okay, how much money do I have going into the next month? Okay, but part A, we're asked to complete the balance column, okay, and then we're asked, what is the ending balance? So after we do all these transactions, how much money do we have in the account? So they tell you, okay, this first little row right here tells you balance forward. So that means from last month, you had $475.58 in your account for this month, okay? Well, we go, so that's our starting balance. That's where we're starting, okay? Much like in the last question, we technically started with $372.85 plus the $58. But once again, they go ahead and start you off here with a transaction. So they tell you whatever your balance was before, you subtract $58 from it, your new balance is $372.85. Here, on the other hand, they tell you, here's the balance, so here's how much you're starting with. And then we go into the transaction. So on September 2nd, 2018, you paid with a check. So the check was number 1308 or 1308. And it tells you that you used this at the grocery store. So you went and bought groceries at the grocery store. Okay. Once again, you just put here some kind of little bit of information so you know where that money went, what you used it for. Okay. So here it was used at the grocery store. And once again, since you paid with a check and you bought something at the grocery store, that means that money would be debited out of your account. That means it would be taken away from your account. So from here, we take the $475.58 and we subtract the $70.89. Okay. And once again, not expecting people to do this in your head. Once you get a little better with money, and if you work with the cash register or work in a field with money, you can maybe start doing this kind of stuff in your head. But if you go from $475.58 and you subtract $70.89, that leaves you with $404.69. Okay. So that was the first transaction. We had $475.58. We paid $70.89 for groceries. So that gives us $404.69 left over. Then we go to the next line. What was the next transaction? Well, the next transaction tells us that we didn't pay with a check. So whatever it is, we didn't pay with a check since there's no check number here. But it tells us that the transaction was our paycheck was deposited. Okay, so you might see something like deposit paycheck or paycheck deposited or, paycheck from work or something like that. You just put something in here that tells you deposited your paycheck from work. Okay, so deposit paycheck. Once again, when you deposit a paycheck or you get paid from your work, that money is money that would go into your account. So that would be a credit. Okay. So we take the $404.69 and we add to it $402.98. Okay, so you got paid for work. So that tells you you now have a total of $807.67. Okay. Once again, all you're doing is taking the balance from the line before and adding the $402.98. Okay. Once again, you go one line down each time, okay? So now we're going to take this $800.67 and see what we do to it. So on 9/18/2018, so September 18th, 2018, we used a check, so check number 1309, to pay our cell phone bill, okay? So once again, paying a cell phone bill means that's going to be money taken out of your account, so that's going to be a debit. And your cell phone bill was $65.40, so you had to pay out of your account $65.40. So that means we're going to take the $65.40 and subtract it from $807.67. Okay, and when you do that, you get $742.27. Once again, you're just taking, you're basically making a running total. Every single transaction, you're finding the new balance, okay? And that's very important to do because that tells you, okay, well, after I paid the grocery store, I had $404.69 in my account, okay? Well, how did I get to the next line? Well, I had that $404.69 and I added to it my paycheck. So that gave me the $807.67. Then that's my new balance. So then, well, how did I get to the next one? Well, I took that $807.67 and subtracted my cell phone bill. And then the same thing's going to happen on 9/23/2018. So September 23rd, 2018, you used another check. So check number 1310 or 1,310 to make a car payment. Once again, car payments is a payment that you make to purchase a car. And it says your car payment was $239.17. Okay. So once again, that's a payment that's going to be a debit. So that means you subtract $239.17 from your current balance. Okay. So once you do that, you're going to see that you have $503.10. Okay. And then lastly, we have $503.10. Well, once again, what is going to happen on the 29th? Well, on the 29th of September, we paid our rent with a check. So in this case, we use check 1,311. We paid our rent. Okay, so how much was our rent? $450. And once again, that's a debit, because once again, you're paying rent. That's money you have to pay out of your account to have a place to live in this case. So in this case, you're paying rent. So that means you take the $503.10 and subtract $450. So that leaves you with $53.10. And once again, what you did in each one of these, you subtract $70.89. You add $402.98. Then you subtract $65.40. Then you subtract $239.17. And then you subtract $450. And once again, this gives you the final balance of $53.10. So that's the final answer for this question. What is the ending balance? $53.10. Okay. So using that balance that we just calculated, okay, this leads us into part B. Your monthly bank statement shows you a balance of $503.10. Explain why your balance does not agree with the bank statement. So this is where the interpreting kind of comes in. Well, notice the date on the day you paid your rent, 9/29/18. Okay, so once you paid your rent, that took away $450. But before that, you had $503.10. Well, if you look, that's what your bank statement says you have. So why does the balance not agree with your bank statement? Well, the check you used to pay your rent might not have cleared, or they might not have cashed that check before your bank statement was made. So this is why it's very important for you to understand, okay, I keep my own balance. I really have $53.10 in my bank account, even though the bank is telling me I have $503.10. Okay, so the answer to this question is going to be, well, the balance on the bank statement is equal to the balance you calculate on 9/23/18. And this is just an example here of why the balance might not agree, because check number 1,311 was close to the end of the month. It likely, so let me make sure I get the wording here correctly. It likely was not processed or cashed in time to appear on your statement. Okay, so this is usually the way this works, is at the end of the month, if you write something like as a check or you pay something with your debit card towards the end of the month, if it's very, very close to the end of the month, the bank might not, like the check, so the person you paid the rent to, they might not cash the check until the first week of October. Okay, even though you paid the rent at the end of September, it actually wouldn't come out of your account until October. But by you keeping a record here, and this is why it's good to keep a running total of what all you pay, because once again, the bank's going to tell you you have $503.10, but that's because the money for the rent hasn't come out of your account yet. So if you do your own calculations, you know you really have $53.10, okay? And that's what we answer part B for is, well, the statement says $503.10. Why does the balance not agree with the bank statement? Well, there's a number of different reasons, but it's kind of a coincidence. It's not really a coincidence that it says $503.10, and what was our balance on 9/23? Well, it was $503.10. So they had it calculated up to here, but since your rent payment was so late in the month, it actually didn't clear, it didn't process in time for it to calculate you down to $53.10. So in this case, once again, this is a common thing with a lot of banks is sometimes they'll send you your statement and it'll appear like you have more or less money than you actually have. Really the only way that you can accurately keep how much money you have in your account is if you do it by yourself and do it by hand and you make your own little registry here, okay? Because once again, at this point, the bank doesn't know you paid your rent. You wrote the check for the rent, but it didn't come out of your account in time for it to be calculated on your balance. Okay, so once again, if you weren't aware of that, you would see your bank statement say, oh, I have $503.10. And you would think, if you weren't paying close attention, you would think that your rent had already been paid. Well, there's a big difference in having $503.10 than having $53.10. Okay? So that's why this example is so important is don't always trust your bank statements to tell you how much you have in your bank account. Okay? It's kind of up to you to keep an accurate running total here and say, okay, well, how much do I actually have? Because once again, in this case, you would have been in trouble because your bank statement said $503.10. Well, how much do you actually have in your bank account? $53.10. Okay. Once again, that's because they did the total here because they weren't aware that you had paid $450 out of your bank account the day before the month ended. Okay. So like I said, this is a good example of why we want to keep Checkbook Registry or why we want to keep up with our bank accounts because, once again, sometimes the bank doesn't necessarily always get it right. And it's not any fault of theirs in this case. It's because they just didn't know you'd paid your rent at the end of the month. So since you paid the rent at the end of the month, they didn't take into account that money had come out yet. Okay. But if you keep a good checkbook registry here, then you know that money's going to come out of your account. So really what you've got to work with for the next month. So this is what would be on the next month's balance forward. Let me fix that. I got outside the lines there. Balance forward for October. This is the amount of money that you have left in your bank account for the next month. Okay. And then you would start at the next month, you would have balance forward $53.10. And then you would go through and make up all your transactions or figure out what your transactions are. So you might have to go to the grocery store. You might get another paycheck. And usually you pay a cell phone bill every month. You pay a car payment every month. You pay your rent every month. Okay. So with that being said, that's where you would start the next month's registry. Okay. So with that being said, that's pretty much it for checkbook balancing. Okay. So just knowing what these numbers mean. Okay. The big thing here is knowing the difference between credit and debit. Okay. And how we use that. Well, we use it in how we subtract or how we add going from one balance to the next. So in this case, you started off with $475.58. You paid your grocery bill. That gave you $404.69. Then you got paid, so you increased your bank account. So you got paid by $400.98, which gave you $807.67, and then so on and so on, okay? But once again, it all stems from the fact, do you have a credit or do you have a debit, okay? Do you have a something that is going to increase the money in your account, or are you going to have something that takes money away from your account? And once again, it should be obvious by the transaction that you put over here, like what's going on. So you paid for the groceries, you paid the cell phone bill, you paid a car payment, you paid rent. Well, you deposited your paycheck. That's a credit. Okay, all the rest of these are debits. But once again, you'll see the practice with this. There'll be a couple practice questions here, but other than that, it's really just a matter of can you add and subtract dollar amounts and decimal numbers, okay, which once again, you can use your calculator with. Don't expect everybody to be able to do every single transaction in your head, but once again, if you need to, use your calculator, but you need to keep a running total. So once again, notice here, we calculate the balance after every transaction, okay, and that's going to make us keep our most accurate tally of how much money we have in our account. Because once again, if you didn't know that you already paid the rent and you said, okay, the bank statement comes in, oh, I've got $503.10. Well, if you were been keeping your own registry, you actually only have $53.10 because you used a check to pay for your rent there at the end of the month, okay? But once again, we'll practice with this. We'll get a little bit better with this. If you have any questions, please let me know. But other than that, thank you for watching.